Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about the 1971 classic A Clockwork Orange, directed by Stanley Kubrick, based on the novel by Anthony Burgess. I have my copy of the novel right here. The novel was published in 1962. So, this is one of the most controversial films ever made. It remained, and its power has not diminished through the decades, I would say. So, a little bit of the context, to back up a little bit to the last film I talked about, Punishment Park, which is about a crackdown on youth culture, um, anti-war protesters, civil rights activists. This movie reverses that ideal at first. This movie imagines a future where young people rule through violence, through street gangs. And this story is primarily about Alex DeLarge, who leads the Droogs, a street gang that engages in all sorts of violent acts, ultra violence, as they're called. Um, the movie also, well, there's a lot of themes in this movie, but the movie also is law and order was a big cultural issue, remains a cultural issue in the early 1970s about how to deal with crime, what proper punishment should be, uh, what are the rights of the individual, how much power should governments have when it comes to crime and punishment. So there's also that theme in the film, but those two of gang violence and law and order and justice are just really scratching the surface of what the novel and the movie's about. The novel and the movie are very close. It's been a while since I've read the novel. I was paging through it a little bit today, and I know there's a famous last chapter that was added to the novel that is not in the movie. I might talk about that, but they're very close. One of the innovative things Burgess did with the novel was he invented this language called NASDAQ, which was a slang language young people in the future would use. It was, by my understanding, it was a blending of Russian and English and slang terms in Great Britain. So it was just a kind of mixing it up together. So we get this interesting way of speaking that if you read, I know that can be confusing for some who read on the book, but I think if you just keep reading through the book, you'll know what the language is talking about, what it's saying, and the film was very loyal to that as well, sticking to the language of the novel. I should talk about the controversy of the film a lot too. So this film was rated X when it came out, mainly for its graphic violence, and it remains a film that's very violent today. We have assaults, we have um, violence. We see all varieties of violence, especially in the first 15-20 minutes of the movie, which is especially intense. And that the violence is very stylized as well, where it makes you almost kind of put you in the perspective of the person committing the violence and the excitement and joy they're getting from from the violence. So and that, as someone said, this movie kind of messes with your brain circuits a little bit, where you realize you, there's this idea of audience complicity when you're watching some of these violent acts and you feel yourself excited by them, okay? Repulsed and excited. So there's a lot of that made the film very controversial, and it's just the graphic nature of the violence was really unlike anything audience had seen before. Famously, the movie allegedly strong evidence that it did influence copycat crimes, where primarily in Britain, where young people saw the movie and then went out and tried to reenact scenes from the movie in real life. Kubrick pulled the movie from Great Britain, banned the movie was banned there, I believe, until the time Kubrick passed away in the late 90s. So and I know it was banned in many other countries as well. So it's remains a very potent film for those reasons too. A little bit about the themes, which I've touched upon in the movie a lot, but just to kind of give a brief overview of the film. So we're Malcolm McDowell, I should mention, who plays Alex in the film, and we start out. And someone said this movie is kind of like in five different sections, where the first part of the film is where we're with the Droobs when they're out wreaking havoc during their nightlife in London, and then after their night of excess, we spend time with Alex at his home, his parents' apartment in London. In the book, Alex is supposed to be only 15. In the movie, he's made a little bit older, probably 18 or so, but it's mentioned he still goes to school. But we're with him in his life, his home life. We get a sense of that, what he's up to, and then he's eventually set up by the other members of his gang, and Alex ends up being involved in a murder, which he goes to prison for. And then the tone of the movie shifts quite a bit, where Alex, who is a very powerful character in the first part of the movie, has his power diminished, and he's in prison. He is trying to behave well, but we get the sense that he's just kind of acting nice just so he can get out early. But we get a sense of the institutions of Britain trying to change Alex. And then he agrees to undergo the Ludovico treatment, which was invented by Anthony Burgess, and the idea it's sort of a brainwashing idea where you would agree to cure violent people who act on their violent impulses, and you have to watch violent movies on a screen for hours on end. And the iconic image of the movie, you can't blink your eyes, and the idea is the constant onslaught of violence will cause someone to not want to act like that anymore, which it appears to work. Like I said, these are very harrowing scenes. Knowing that Malcolm McDowell was actually injured pretty severely during the filming of those scenes. So there's that. And then the final part is when Alex is given his freedom. He, whenever he has a violent impulse at that point, he kind of freezes up, feels sick, and he's become a shell of what he once was. And that last part of the movie is almost a reverse of the first part of the movie, where a lot of the people he victimize Alex. Okay, and there's a lot of he gets this idea of revenge on Alex, and it also and the tone gets way more satirical as well in the last part of the movie, where Alex becomes a pawn of the state, you might say. So it's a very Kubrickian ending in that way, with what it has to say about power systems and the individual and all this. So that's a little bit of a sketch of the story in the movie. And yeah, and I should mention as well, I talked about 2001 earlier, and visually and thematically, I mean, all Kubrick's films have similar themes, but just this movie was made just a few years after 2001, and you can see a lot of thematic connections between both films. We have, 2001 ends with us on the Star Child. This film begins with a close up on Alex, kind of in this strange gaze right into the camera, a very haunting gaze that begins the film, and even the dynamic among the Droobs is very similar to Among the Apes in 2001, like as Kubrick portrayed it. And even the final shot of this movie, I think, is almost a parody of 2001. So there's just a lot of connections between the two, and the themes in the movie of the self-destructive nature of humanity, of technology, the relationship with technology, and how we use it in this case to try to change human behavior, and how technology can mess us up and things like that. And yeah, yeah, but and to the theme of dehumanization of, if you take away someone's free will, are you taking away their humanity, even if their free will is violent and things like that. So the film dances on some really touchy questions, okay, about the nature of humanity itself, and how we should treat violent people. Are humans inherently violent? How do we balance our impulses with civilization? Very psychological themes in the movie. Like when we first are with Alex, in the beginning of the film, like he acts on his id constantly. Whatever he wants, he just acts and gets it right. And most people don't act that way. Most people, we have to repress ourselves to a certain extent, for civilization to function. So the movie just gets into so many of these taboo questions of these primal feelings and desires and everything that people have in the film. Yeah, the aesthetics of the film are also almost a whole thing in itself in this dystopian future. I think it's supposed to be some point in the 21st century, mid 21st century, but it's almost like someone has described it as like this future past style where the fashions and the architecture seems to evoke the past, but also have this futuristic way about it. The costumes in the film are iconic, of course, a lot of them. So we get this odd mix of urban decay. We get the sense that the city of London is overwhelmed with crime, but outside of the city, people are able to live their lives and the way people lived it, 50, 100 years ago. For for some people, like if they have the privilege, they could live the way things used to be, whereas some people have to deal with the reality and things like that. So there is that idea in the movie, and a lot of the victims of the droogs are people who live outside of the city, so they do things like that, and once again that mirrors what was happening in a lot of cities in America. We talk about white flight and the cities, a lot of people leaving the cities for the suburbs, so things like that. But also with the aesthetics of the movie, I mean, a lot of different art styles we see. There's a pop art aesthetic throughout the movie, but also a kind of classical style, Victorian style as well throughout the film with the architecture and with the fashions and things like that. A lot of people have, but also the 60s as well. I mean, mod culture is definitely of London mob culture influenced this movie. A lot of people have cited this movie as being a like pre-punk, like an early stirring of punk culture. The idea of young people feeling like there's no future at all for them and kind of making their own reality and their own existential ideals out of the idea of living in a world with no future. So there is like that punkish quality to the movie that was also there as well. Yeah, yeah. So, and juvenile delinquent movies, which were popular in the 50s, and the movie draws, I think, a lot of iconography from there as well. So yeah, the aesthetics in the movie are great. The music by Wendy Carlos in the movie with the use of um, Moog synthesizers and just taking Beethoven music and making it into synthesizer. It's just a really strange, really haunting score that we get. And really the first 40 minutes of the movie, it's a lot of music. There's a lot of Beethoven as well and throughout the movie. And even the Alex character, I think like the contradictions of the character where he is this on one level this street criminal, but at the same time he has these aspirations where he loves Beethoven and he loves high art. Okay, so the idea of once again, I think a character that was kind of new, the idea of a criminal actually having sophisticated tastes and things like that, and Beethoven's a recurrent motif throughout the film, and used, and it's interesting how the music movie uses music to control people personalities. At first Alex gets so much from Beethoven, but that's later turned against him. So it's interesting about our relationship with music is another big theme in the movie, and is interesting. Yeah, and just Malcolm McDowell's performance, of course, is one of the all-time most just electric performances you'll ever see in a movie. The contradictions of the character, someone who we we never really get a handle on who Alex is. I mean, at times he's terrifying, at times he's funny, at times he seems pathetic and completely harmless. As we see the journey of the character, and he sometimes he's very childlike, acts like a child. Other times, as if he has the maturity of a much older person, is there throughout the movie too. So obviously Alex he victimizes people, but he's also a victim himself. And I think that's what I think a lot of audiences can struggle with in this movie, and things like that. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, and I think all the performances in the movie too, not just Malcolm McDowell, but all the characters are kind of are heightened in the movie. Like it's like all the performances, everyone's at a different volume in this film, and which makes it feel strange. And it's a very British film as well. It's very British, where it feels like a British movie of its era, and yet it doesn't look or feel like any other movie of its era either. And yet it's very British. So that's interesting as well. But the legacy of this movie, I think it's people have different reactions to it. Like I think when the 40th anniversary, I remember it was screening at theaters, and I remember taking a few friends to go see it, and neither of them had seen the film before. And I remember after the movie walking out, they didn't have much to say. They were not happy with this movie. Okay, they were not. It was not a pleasant experience for them, and I get it. There, if you're not know, if you don't know what you're in for, there is a sensory overload in this movie, and if violence there can be very triggering, especially in this movie too. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So people have very different reactions to it. The way the movie, as I said, was embraced by punk culture, and I'm sure the movie has attracted all sorts of people to its um to its style and things like that. I mean, I think among film people, its reputation is highly regarded. Many consider it to be maybe Kubrick's best film, but it always changes with me. Like sometimes I'll watch it and I'm not too, especially the middle section, I find a bit laborious. But other times I'll watch it and I think it's just close to a perfect movie. As I don't like to say a movie's perfect, but as close as perfect as a movie can be. So I don't know. Maybe a lot of it depends on your state of mind when you're watching it. I know, like this time when I watched it, like I had a little trouble sleeping, and it's maybe not the best movie to watch before going to bed because it does, it's gonna stick in your mind for at least a few hours after you watch it and things like that. So yes, yes. Anyway, so yeah, so a very complicated legacy with this film, no doubt about it. But yeah, and I did want to mention a few other movies that are kind of connected to this. So Malcolm McDowell, who was in a movie called If. Okay, I have the blue. This is the Criterion disc here, which came out a few years before Clockwork Orange, and was the movie that Kubrick watched and thought McDowell was the only person who could play Alex in the movie. And even thematically, this movie has a lot in common. It was directed by Lindsay Anderson with Clockwork Orange, where this movie is set at a prep school in Britain, and there's a rebellion and so themes of youth rebellion and things like that. And this was the first of what would be called the Mick Travis trilogy, which McDowell would play different incarnations of the character through it. And then a few years after Clockwork Orange, there was Oh Lucky Man with Malcolm McDowell, which also part of the Mick Travis trilogy. And this movie is almost, I always think of it as a spiritual sequel almost to Clockwork Orange, where it's dealing with a lot of similar themes. It has this episodic picaresque structure to it that's similar to the Kubrick film. Visually, I think there's some visual references, a lot to it, some of it very intentional in this movie, but this movie is a very much a satire of 1970s Britain and culture, but it's yeah, I think it's these movies are all in conversation with each other. Then finally, the final part of the Mick Travis trilogy was Britannia Hospital, which came out in the 1980s and is an interesting conclusion to the trilogy. We never got any more with Mick Travis, but once again, very absurdist, very much a satire of um of Britain. So yeah, there's a lot connected with these films, and I mentioned Oh Lucky Man to go back to that too. It has a great music score by Alan Price as well in this movie. So yeah, if you want to do the full deep dive into some Malcolm McDowell movies, but also movies that are very much in that 1970s um, British satire, dark comedy mode. These are some movies that are all, like I said, feel connected to each other. So I guess I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.